again, and welcome to Episode 5, Season 4 of the Dorothy L. Sayers podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Scholl, and today's show is entitled, Get Help. Writing is not a solo performance. This will be the final episode of this short season. Certainly there's much more to say, but I think if we take in these 5 lessons of her writing, then our writing will be transformed. To be honest, I feel like a hypocrite airing this episode. Perhaps I actually am a hypocrite because I haven't consulted anybody but my husband in an episode entitled Get Help. Theoretically, I should have assembled a team of experts, but no, it's just me and a microphone. I find comfort in the fact that this podcast is about what Sayers does. I'm trying to learn from her strengths just like you are. Sayers was not a humble writer. She knew she wrote well and could not endure a great deal of criticism. Well, we'll find out how that plays out in a second. But I do want to tell you the story of Miss May Jenkins. Sayers had a contract with the BBC to write the radio drama The Man Born to be King, a dramatic retelling of the life of Christ. Although fans of that play may not think of it as a work for children, it was originally written for a program called The Children's Hour, directed by Derek McCulloch, who, by the way, was a radio personality himself called Uncle Mac, although that doesn't enter into this narrative. At one point, Sayers had sent in the first section of the play. McCulloch was away in Scotland for a short time, so he couldn't read it. He asked his assistant director, May Jenkins, to read it and communicate with Sayers. Jenkins did as she was told, loved the play, and wrote to Sayers. After complimenting the play's drama, profundity, and beauty, she suggests that some of those dramatic, beautiful speeches would go over the heads of the children. Further, some of the idioms in the play felt too modern. Jenkins then asks, "We wonder if you will allow us to discreetly edit. If you would prefer to make these small alterations yourself, I will send you the play back. But we are anxious not to delay having the copies duplicated, and posts are so slow at the moment. We would, of course, get your okay for every change before the broadcast." Before I share Sayers' response, we should note that this was in 1940. Sayers had been a published novelist for over a decade. She had written numerous articles and had already worked with the BBC on religious drama, a nativity play entitled He That Should Come. She was not a young writer eager to have an editor's input on her style. She was an accomplished professional who had worked on her craft for many years. Although she does eventually get heated over Miss Jenkins' request, her initial response is polite and stern. She works through the suggestions and declines nearly every one of them, and strenuously objects to any rewrites of the text. Regarding the passages that are over the head of the children, she retorts, "I knew how you would react to those passages. It is my business to know. It is also my business to know how my real audience will react, and yours to trust me to know it." Meanwhile, McCulloch returns from his trip. He supports Miss Jenkins' edits and asks if Sayers will come to Bristol. At this point, Sayers lights up. "Oh, no, you don't, my poppet. You won't get me to do 3 days of exhausting travel to Bristol in order to argue about my plans with a committee. What goes into the play and the language in which it is written is the author's business. If the management don't like it, they reject the play, and there is an end of the contract." Now, there's some more back and forth, including Sayers writing about the incident to James Welch, the BBC's director of religious broadcasting. Things settle down. Then Miss Jenkins defends herself and tells Sayers that the responsibility of the Children's Hour program rests firmly with Mr. McCulloch and, in his absence, with me. Therefore, we cannot delegate to any author, however distinguished, the right to say what shall or shall not be broadcast in a Children's Hour play. By the way, this is in December of 1940. Sayers' response is to cancel the contract, which she indicated by sending the BBC tiny, torn-up pieces of it. Sayers had a reputation for feistiness. She knew it. In the midst of the controversy, she lamented to Welch, "I am sorry for all this, which is in no way your fault. You see now why I am disliked at the BBC, and why Gielgud, who is a producer there, enjoys, or so I am told, an extraordinary reputation as a Sayers tamer. He knows his job, that is the secret of that, as of many other remarkable reputations." It could be easy to conclude from all of this that Sayers was not a team player. Maybe she was like Mozart in the movie Amadeus, who, when the Emperor of Austria suggested there are too many notes, responds, "I don't understand. There are just as many notes, Majesty, as are required. Neither more nor less." That whole dialogue, though, I don't think it is historically accurate. It does portray an uneven relationship of a talented artist with an ignorant but powerful layman. In a way, maybe the situations with Jenkins is like the Amadeus scene. Mozart, in his isolated artistic grandeur, was right about the notes. The emperor was not. In that sense, the emperor was outside of his proper job, which did not include evaluating music. Listen to that last line from Sayers' letter. Gielgud knows his job. That is the secret of that, as of many other remarkable reputations. Knowing your job and knowing the job of others. This was a requirement for working with Sayers. Sayers actually sought and received help all the time. We talked about one of those examples in our last episode. When writing her second novel, Clouds of Witness, Sayers had to research what a trial by the peers of the realm would look like. She tracked down a barrister who knew his stuff, who gave her what he could, and then asked a lord he knew who actually had been tried. Later in her life, when defending the Roman poet Lucan about an astronomical issue against the condescension of Lucan's translator, Robert Graves, let me say that again, by the way, just because there's a lot of moving parts. So, Lucan, ancient Roman poet, had been translated in Sayers' day by a man named Robert Graves. Okay, so Sayers did not like Graves' translation. Parts of translation, she didn't like his notes, and to protest against what Graves did, she needed an astronomer's help. So she asked her academic friend, Barbara Reynolds, to put her in touch with an astronomer, to whom she sent a 4-page letter outlining her conclusions and asking for his advice. She concludes, "If you are by any chance interested, there are a lot of things I should like to bother you with. If not, please tell me firmly to go away. With again very many thanks and apologies for being so long-winded and so ignorant." This was in 1957, by the way. And of course, as a playwright, she worked with producers, directors, actors, and costume designers. She knew her proper job was writing, but she did not try to tell an actor how to do his job. In the 5th chapter of The Mind of the Maker, she talks about the relationship of the playwright and the actors. If he, the playwright, is of an egotistical kind, finding no satisfaction except in the autocratic enforcement of his sole will, he will find actors maddening almost beyond endurance. But if he is of the more liberal kind of creator, he will eagerly welcome, I will not say bad acting, which is altogether sinful and regrettable, but imaginative and free acting, and find an immensely increased satisfaction in the individual creativeness which the actor brings to his part. Lords of the realm, astronomers, actors, when it came to other spheres of expertise, Sayers was happy to get help. And it's hard to distinguish the content from the form. Getting help on astronomy is getting help with writing. We should not pass over this point quickly. Writing needs other disciplines. It needs proper research, which is what we discussed in episode number 4, The Monster Error. But what about help with her writing? Did she ever get help on that? Now that's a bit more difficult to track down. After all, writers give a lot of advice about writing, but when is it documented that they receive it? I asked my friend and Sayers researcher, Selah Hurd, you might remember her from the Even the Parrot episode in season 3, if she had any ideas on where Sayers may have received criticism on her writing style. So I did get help. I got help from my husband and I got help from Selah. So Selah points out that Sayers received advice from her friend from Oxford, Muriel St. Clair Byrne, as she was writing Gaudy Night. Sayers had been wrestling with the emotional responses of some of the characters, and she closes one of her letters to Muriel with this line. "I can well believe that with my mind fixed on establishing the when, how, and where of the crime, I may have failed to get these things over. Please don't mind altering anything at all that seems to you weak or inadequate." This is a letter from March 1935. Now, this is a pretty stunning admission for an accomplished writer. Don't mind altering anything at all that seems to you weak or inadequate. And later, Sayers defends points that Muriel criticizes, but she does it in a far different way than with the Miss Jenkins situation. And later, she actively collaborates with Muriel on the play, which later becomes a novel, Busman's Honeymoon. As I mentioned, Muriel was an old and established friend. In fact, she was a member of the Mutual Admiration Society, which is possibly the most significant reminder to us that Sayers was a collaborative writer at heart. There was a volume published in 2019 entitled The Mutual Admiration Society, How Dorothy L. Sayers and Her Oxford Circle Remade the World for Women. This work by Mole Moulton details the collaboration of the society during their time at Oxford and beyond it. Though the author pushes the LGBTQ line in the book beyond what I think the evidence allows, Moulton does remind us how important friendship is in writing. The Mutual Admiration Society, founded in 1912, was simply a group of friends, all women students at Oxford, to share their works and, well, admire them. But let's consider the intellectual caliber of its participants, and I'm drawing this from Moulton's book, for which I'm very grateful. Muriel would become a playwright and scholar of Tudor England. Caris Barnett became a social activist who raised 4 children, but was also an outspoken activist on maternal mortality and the benefits of birth control. Dorothy Rowe would become an English teacher and founder of a successful amateur theater club. Muriel Jaeger, whose nickname was Jim, wrote plays and novels, including some science fiction novels. With such a lineup, any work would have been subject to criticism as well as praise. Thank the Inklings, but younger. The Mutual Admiration Society continued its influence long beyond Oxford. We have already mentioned the collaboration with Muriel St. Byrne. Sayers also lived with Dorothy Rowe for a time after Oxford and later exchanged thoughts with her about some of her Canterbury plays. She also kept up lively and somewhat entertaining friendship with Jim Jaeger. I'll include a quote here because it's so, well, you'll see. Anyway, young post-Oxford Sayers writes this to her mother in October of 1921. As for Jim Jaeger, she is a mystery. She is still here in London with no job, living, I imagine, entirely on her people or somebody, and writing something mysterious, which she won't say anything about to anybody. I suspect her of her novel like everybody else. A novel seems the thing to write nowadays. I wish I had the application for it. Unfortunately, novels seldom interest me, even to read, and the thought of grinding one out is fearful. So, this may seem like a significant gap in her self-knowledge, but the editor of the letters tells us in a footnote that Sayers must have distinguished detective stories from novels, especially because she was writing the novel Whose Body at the time. A detective story, obviously. The Mutual Admiration Society has plenty of evidence for Sayers' writing and community, but we could go on. Her willingness to work with the BBC, despite what happened, her respect for actors and producers, her prolific letter exchanges with Charles Williams about Dante, and in later life, her getting advice on translating the Divine Comedy with a younger Dante scholar named Barbara Reynolds. Listen to this quote attributed to Johann Goethe, and it'll be in contrast to what we've been talking about. A creation of importance can only be produced when its author isolates himself. It is a child of solitude. It is easy to think of writing like this. After all, you literally can't write and talk at the same time. At least I can't. Most of us have to be alone to collect our thoughts, choose our words. We can easily picture Charles Dickens at his desk, Virginia Woolf in her armchair, David McCullough writing popular history in a backyard cabin in New England. But these are not complete pictures. They leave out the teamwork inherent in research, listening to what the sources, though dead, are saying, which is kind of a sort of teamwork. The back and forth with publishers, the patience of loved ones who are subjected to hearing yet another version of the same chapter. When it comes to writing, faithful are the wounds of a friend. You need some critique. There is a reason that Sayers' letters are published in 4 long volumes, and those are curated from even more letters. She wrote in community. Though the actual text may have been composed on her own, she was constantly getting ideas, giving ideas, and consulting experts. Now, I mentioned the exchange between Charles Williams and Sayers about Dante, and I want to spend just a minute on that. These are very enthusiastic exchanges. Williams had written an insightful book entitled The Figure of Beatrice. Sayers read it, and the ideas within it fired her up to study Dante again, and then to embark on her own translation of the Divine Comedy. It's fun to read the letters she writes to him. She's burbling over with enthusiasm. She was surprised by Dante, prepared to find him a great poet, but delighted also to find him good company. She says, "I was certainly not prepared to find myself continually saying with a chuckle, 'Dear, funny Dante.'" She sends Williams pages and pages comparing Dante to Milton, extolling Terza Rima, and reflecting on the gates of hell. And she writes all of it in the attitude of a humble, adoring child, signing one of her letters, "Ever, dear Charles, your faithful and affectionate pupil." That's from 1944. For more on her exchange with Charles Williams about Dante, you can listen to Season 1, Episode 11, which is entitled Dorothy and Dante. Actually, the earlier episodes on coherence would be good, and then the later ones in Season 2 on Hell, Purgatory, and Paradise. There's lots there. I want to conclude with an excerpt from one of her novels. In Gaudy Night, there is an exchange between Harriet Vane and Peter Wimsey about Harriet's novel, Death Twixt Wind and Water, which he's working on. Although I'm not going to equate Vane with Sayers, I do think she wrote this scene as a good example of how to receive and give constructive criticism. Anyway, Peter asks Harriet how the book is going, and she replies, "It's gone sticky." But what's happened to it? This involved a full rehearsal of the plot of Death Twixt Wind and Water. It was a complicated story, and the punt had covered a good deal of water before she reached the solution. "There's nothing fundamentally wrong with that," said he, and proceeded to offer a few suggestions about detail. "How intelligent you are, Peter. You're quite right. Of course, that would be much the best way to get over the clock difficulty. But why does the whole story sound so dead and alive?" "If you ask me," said Whimsy, "it's Wilfred. I know he marries a girl, but must he be such a mutt? Why does he go and pocket the evidence and tell all those unnecessary lies?" "Because he thinks the girl's done it." "Yes, but why? Why should he? He's dotingly in love with her. He thinks she's absolutely the cat's pajamas, and yet, merely because he finds her handkerchief in the bedroom, he is instantly convinced, on evidence that wouldn't hang a dog, that she not only is Winchester's mistress, but has also murdered him in a peculiarly diabolical way. That may be one way of love, but you would like to point out it isn't yours, and in fact, it wasn't yours." There it was again, the old resentment, the impulse to hit back savagely for the pleasure of seeing him wince. "No," he said, "I was considering the question impersonally. Academically, in fact. Yes, please. Look, from a purely constructional point of view, I don't feel that Wilfred's behavior is sufficiently accounted for." "Well," said Harriet, recovering her poise, "academically speaking, I admit that Wilfred is the world's worst goop. But if he doesn't conceal the handkerchief, where's my plot? Couldn't you make Wilfred one of those morbidly conscientious people who have been brought up to think that anything pleasant must be wrong? So that, if he wants to believe the girl an angel of light, she is, for that very reason, all the more likely to be guilty? Give him a puritanical father and a hellfire religion." "Peter, that's an idea." "He has, you see, a gloomy conviction that love is sinful in itself, and that he can only purge himself by taking the young woman's sins upon him and wallowing in vicarious suffering. He'd still be a goop, and a pathological goop, but he would be a bit more consistent." "Yes, he'd be interesting. But if I give Wilfred all those violent and lifelong feelings... if I give Wilfred all of those violent and lifelike feelings, he'll throw the whole book out of balance." "You would have to abandon the jigsaw kind of story and write a book about human beings for a change." "I'm afraid to try that, Peter. It may go too near to the bone." Okay, we'll stop there on that. This is an indicator of the kind of back-and-forth critique Sayers appreciated. Though Sayers herself had no Lord Peter, she had a cast of friends and experts she relied on in her own writing. The key for her was you had to know what you were talking about. Harriet accepts advice from Lord Peter because she respects his judgment on human nature, since the subject of their discussion was a character's motivation. Though not a writer, he was addressing her from within his proper sphere of expertise. With the internet at my fingertips, I rarely reach out to get help from actual people. Wikipedia can tell me most things. Grammarly can help me with style, although actually I've never used it, so I feel good on that score. But it's hard to replace an actual person who can read your work and evaluate it on multiple levels. AI cannot give the sort of help Peter gives in that excerpt from Gaudy Night. It can't generate the excited exchange of ideas Sayers has with Williams. It can't even get the harsh critique Sayers, like all popular writers, received. The writing practice I have for you this week is obvious. Man up and give your writing to someone else to read. Someone whose opinion you respect. Someone whose writing you respect. Let them comb through your work and question your sentence structure, your choice of vocabulary. Let them make your writing better. You don't have to agree with them on all points, but if you respect their writing, you probably should take some of their suggestions. This closes our short season on how to write. Obviously, writing is a massive topic, and you can learn more about Sayers' approach by reading her works. To read a transcript of this episode or continue the discussion, join us at the Sayers Guild at www.sayersguild.com. God bless you.